Isn't that bizarre? Man.
Now, there you go. Thank you. I thank you. Everybody else probably does not. All right. Hey, Steve, I appreciate you going out there and bringing Tut in. Yeah, I saw him out there hiding. Had to bring him in. All right. Ellen's walking in, but I need to put out, is there anybody who wants her job as secretary? We'll wait on her then. How about that? Yeah. Now, I was seeing if we'd wait on you or somebody else wanted your job, and we're waiting. We're waiting.
Mally's here. We can start.
Yeah. Guys, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate you being here. We are deep into our discernment process, and there's many things that we're to do, and we're doing them. And we're writing it down. We talked with district superintendent. He says you need to do these 17 things, and we're going through them. And we're doing them one at a time. And the prayer is one of the major things. For tonight, for the notes, this is a special meeting, but for the notes, we're going to use video. So it's being recorded. And Ellen probably just have just the broadest of outlines of probably like 5 words, but we're going to use the digital recording as a historical thing for our minutes. I can get louder. Minutes. Oh, that was the main thing. That's what you told me to say, right? Okay, got that. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, we go ahead and get to it. Today, we got the very Reverend Steve West. He's been here before. He's been with us several times, and I'm sure he considers us one of his adopted congregations. And we do appreciate him coming. We appreciate your years of faithfulness and all the things that you've been doing with this and in your service. But we do appreciate that. And we feel like you're part of our congregation too.
Well, there's some reasons for that.
Yes, yeah. But your dad said he would buy you dinner, so we got that. But we're open and we're ready for your insightfulness, and we've heard and talked to, and some of us have worked with Steve on councils and meetings and stuff like that, and we're very open. Any questions, if we could, we'll hold them to after his presentation. No doubt it'll be informal, but we'll let him finish before we start asking questions. And then this is the only speaker we have tonight. We didn't want to dilute the message with bringing some of the follow-ons in and stuff like that. But we'll do those as the district superintendent told us to do. So we'll take care of those. But for tonight, we have Steve, the very Reverend. Thank you, sir.
And may I impose upon my father to lead us in prayer before I start? Would you, Dad? And thank you, Dad. And I'm glad I was not technically adopted. I appreciate that. We did a DNA test, so we know this. I have 2 handouts. I brought one, and there was one prepared for you, and I want everybody to have them both. Would you help me with that? That'd be great. And that's the one that Dad brought, and that's another one I brought. Okay? And couples can share. I want to thank you so much for the chance to be here and to share with you. Before I start, my mother would have been proud that I became an author because she taught AP English. And I have a book that I recently published called Something Happens Here, Reclaiming the Distinctiveness of Wesley's Communion Spirituality for Our Times of Divisiveness. And it's about communion, but it also has to do with tonight and why one of the many biblical reasons why I choose to stay in the United Methodist Church. And I brought it as a gift for your pastor, Mike. I want you to have it out of appreciation for your ministry with some people I know really well, and I appreciate that. That's a gift for you. And I just wanted to share it. For the rest of you, you can get it on Amazon if you want it, and that's great. I feel you are correct. I feel very connected with this church. I've been here to preach. I've been here to do music. When I was starting the Morning Star congregation in Chelsea, we had one of our founding team members named Kim Limbaugh Hayes that knows this church very well. You may know a certain Amy Cockrell, who is in the room, who was on my praise team with her 2 boys. And we just had a lot of history, and all that time I was a part. And then my dad retires, and you knew my mother and you know my dad and his beloved friend Dot, or they're part of our family and part of your family. Celebrate Recovery has kept my dad out of trouble for many years, and I appreciate that. And most dear to my heart, this was the place where we laid my brother Richmond to rest the week after he sang in your choir. And so it's very dear to me, and I thank you so much for our connection. And I want to share with you about that because we are a connectional church. Now, we have a lot of family connections, but the reason I know you fundamentally is because we are connected as the body of Christ. Now, I have given you an outline and a handout, and I appreciate being able to speak to you tonight from my heart and from my perspective. And I appreciate the open-mindedness and the open-heartedness of a discernment process. I think churches that are going through a discernment process right now, if they open their hearts and their minds to varying perspectives, that is the best way to do it. And so I come with, now I'm unashamed in my perspectives, and I'm gonna give it to you the way I see it, but that's why you asked me tonight, and you'll have different people on different nights to share their perspectives. So I respect everybody's decisions. I respect everybody's perspectives. I respect your decision as a congregation. I am going to give you my perspective, and I'm unashamedly planning to stay in the United Methodist Church, and I'll tell you why tonight. And so I appreciate that. Thank you for opening your hearts to me tonight. Again, I respect your decision, whatever it might be. Thank you for allowing me to speak in favor of staying in the United Methodist Church, and I ask you to consider that tonight. I don't need to go through a lot of background on tonight, but you know that there was a called general conference in 2019 because there seemed to be an impasse in our denomination. At that time, a commission on the way forward that had been supported by the bishops proposed a one-church plan, a way for us to stay together, not by really forcing anybody to change, but through what we call contextualization, this idea that we can continue to have traditional churches, moderate and centrist churches, progressive churches, and all continue to be together with some leeway over things that we have up until this point considered something that we had to all do exactly the same. And I try to explain it to people like states' rights. You know, our country recently made a decision on abortion We did not decide to make abortion illegal everywhere. What we decided was to pass that decision to the states. That's the only decision that was made. Okay, so the one church plan and plans like that plan for us moving forward, respect that different parts of the country might have different ways of doing things, and to give some organized leeway, like states' rights, among the annual conferences to deal with certain things. Now, what passed instead, as you know, and I'm just giving you a couple of paragraphs to catch us up. What passed instead in 2019 was the traditional plan, which not only maintained language that is controversial about homosexuality and matters related to that, it became even more punitive. So, what has happened most recently is aware that the majority of the delegates in the United States had voted in favor of the one church plan. The advocacy group, the Wesleyan Covenant Association, made sure that in 2019 there was also passed an exit plan for churches that wished to leave. Okay? Now, then in May of 2022, which was this year, when COVID caused, and lack of visas in 45 countries of delegates and so forth, when that caused General Conference to be proposed again, the Global Methodist Church, supported by the advocacy group, the Wesleyan Covenant Association, suddenly announced that they're going to go ahead and form their breakaway denomination. Again, the discipline has not changed and about these controversial matters, and if it ever does, churches and annual conferences will still be able to remain as traditional as they want to be. No plan will ever force a church or a pastor to do anything that is outside their convictions. But this particular exit plan was passed in 2019, and it does have a deadline. That's why we're here. The deadline is the end of 2023. That's why some churches are going through discernment. So that's just a quick catch-up as to why we're here. We're all straight on that. Now, first, let me give you a little bit of full disclosure. I know you've asked me to come and speak on behalf of the option of staying in the United Methodist Church. Let me give you a little full disclosure. I serve Jacksonville First United Methodist Church. I consider myself a traditional Orthodox and Wesleyan pastor, and always have and always will be. Those are terms that are sometimes claimed by those who are leaving, but they can't exclusively claim those terms. For me, and this is my perspective, for me, there's nothing traditional, Orthodox, or Wesleyan about leaving our denomination over matters that are not addressed in the Gospels, not mentioned in any of the ancient creeds of the church, not talked about by John Wesley in any of his writings, and not in the core teachings and articles of religion and doctrines of the United Methodist Church. Okay? For me, that's the definition of traditional and Orthodox. And these are over culture wars, plain and simple. And so for me, that's being traditional is why I personally choose to stay in. I also want to give you another bit of full disclosure. I am one of the founders and principal authors of a grassroots organization called Stay UMC, which you may have heard of. It's pretty evident in the name. And it started when, in 2019, after that very conflictual general conference, I gathered what I called centrist support groups, people who are like me, who are kind of moderates, trying to sort through this. And I ended up, we worked together. I ended up writing a letter that went viral in February of 2000, and it evolved into Stay UMC, which messages the optimal option of staying in the United Methodist Church. And now we have almost 600 signatories, and you can see our website and all that. Fortunately, I know somebody who knows about the computer. Okay, I'm not the guy who did that, but that's been great. Now, I have nothing, and we have nothing against churches and persons and pastors who choose to leave the United Methodist Church. They're following their convictions, as my convictions are calling me to stay in the church. But we just want to make sure laity have accurate and balanced information. There's a lot of misinformation out there. Have you learned that just because you see something on the internet doesn't necessarily mean it's true? Raise your hand. Yes, okay, everybody knows this. Everything you see on the news is true, right? Whether you watch MSNBC or Fox or whatever. Well, we know that you have to filter through information, okay? I believe many will choose to stay in the United Methodist Church when they really think through it. Now, I have 2 or 3 parts of my presentation. I'm going to work through it so we can get to some time of questions. I hope I don't go too fast, but I also don't want to go too slow. On the front of what I gave you is an outline, so you can kind of see what I'd like to cover tonight. And first of all, some helpful language. Let's talk about some helpful language that helps me to explain where we are and why I choose to stay in the United Methodist Church. In 2016, the Commission on a Way Forward and the bishops had asked to come up with a solution, and which proposed the one church plan, which was rejected in 2019. Even though it was supported by 2/3 of American delegates, it was rejected. One of the most helpful things about that is they talked about 4 different kinds of United Methodists when it comes to some social issues. And I put that on your sheet so you can kind of see the language. First of all, you have traditional incompatibilists. These are folks that have a traditional view of things like human sexuality, but they're incompatibilists. In other words, they don't want to be in communion with those who might differ from them or their practices. They can't imagine being in church with those that might think differently, or being in communion as a larger church with those that might think differently on those issues. Then you have traditional compatibilists. A traditional compatibilist is someone who might have traditional views on things like marriage, but they're compatible. They're okay with other people that go to church with them, and other churches, in another part of the country, perhaps having slightly different practices related to those matters, as long as we can continue to be traditional here in our town, in our church, in our conference, and in my family, okay? That's a traditional compatibilist. A progressive compatibilist is, as you can guess by now, someone who might be progressive about matters like same-sex marriage, but they're okay going to church with people who are not. We don't have to agree on all those things, and I can be a part of a communion. I can be compatible with others. And then a progressive incompatibilist, you can probably guess, is one who feels that the gospel compels them that the progressive side of these issues is the only way they're willing to think, and they're not willing to be in communion with those who might differ from that point of view. Okay, that's what they gave us. I tell you this for 2 reasons. One is for my full disclosure. I consider myself a traditional compatibilist when it comes to matters like marriage in the local church that I serve. I'm traditional, but I'm okay with other parts of the country might make different decisions about that right now. I consider myself a progressive compatibilist when it comes to loving that person who walks through that door on Sunday morning. I have seen too many shameful times when people are rejected and left out of the church. And the last thing they need to be is left out of church, no matter who they are. God welcomes all people into the fellowship of God's congregations. So that's where I stand. I also tell you this because you might hear language saying that traditional United Methodists are leaving the church. That's inaccurate. It's more accurate to say traditional incompatibilists are leaving the church. That's accurate. There are many traditional United Methodists that believe we're better together in this critical time in our country, where there's so much divisiveness that we can stand for unity and figure out how to move forward together. For me, that's the messiness of what it means to be the traditional church. So I tell you that to tell that language, it really helps to understand what's at stake today. Again, I have nothing against those churches and individuals and pastors who wish to leave the United Methodist Church. I choose to stay in the 80 to 85% of the church across the country who is going to stay in the United Methodist Church. I want to be a part of the greater body. I believe we're better together. I believe we can figure it out moving forward. At one time, we thought the African church was going to leave with the new Global Methodist Church. They have recently come out with a statement saying they are most definitely not. So the African church will stay in the United Methodist Church. In the outline or in the handouts I gave you is a letter about that's as fresh as just a few days ago. The bishops in Africa have criticized the WCA and the GMC and come out saying they are staying in the United Methodist Church. Okay, that's a big surprise to many of us, but that has come out last week. I choose to stay in and to be a part of the greater church. It's, from my perspective, going to be just as traditional where I serve and in other places that it always has been. Traditional, centrist, and progressive United Methodists staying in. The next thing I'd like to share with you is just a quick note on essential United Methodist or Wesleyan spirituality. Okay, what is our essential spirituality? One of the resources I put in a handout, I put some balancing resources in there because you can find all kinds of misinformation or biased information online. And I put those in there to help you in your journey. One of those is the Celebrate UMC event where Tom Berlin spoke. And that was, I took my daddy to that meeting. You might know him. And it was in Montgomery. And if you're going to watch one video from my but I want to do a little what I call Methodist myth busting. And this is to dispel some myths so that if you make a decision as a church to be an independent church or join in another denomination, so that you make the decision based on what's true and what's good and what's a fact and what's true for you. So I want to do a little Methodist myth busting with you. And here's a few myths I listed on there. I'm going to address each one from my perspective. And thank you for letting me speak from my perspective. Myth number one is the beliefs of the United Methodist Church are going to dramatically change. All you have to do is get on the internet and you'll see all sorts of versions of this. This is the idea that the post-separation United Methodist Church is going to stop following the Bible, and they're going to abandon beliefs in our historic creeds. They're not going to believe in the resurrection. They're not going to believe in the virgin birth. They're going to embrace pluralism. They're going to abandon the lordship of Christ. You name it, you can find it on the internet. It's just not true. Those are what you call a straw man argument. Have you ever heard the term straw man argument? You set up a straw man to attack instead of dealing with what the actual difference is. Would you care to guess who invented the term straw man argument? Don't say John Wesley, because that wouldn't be right. Yeah. Martin Luther invented that term. Martin Luther was the leader of the Protestant Reformation who stood up against the Catholic Church's sales of indulgences and started what became our faith eventually. As the Protestant church. And the Catholics criticized him for what he was saying. And they made up all kinds of stuff about what he was saying that is not what he was saying. And in one of his writings, Martin Luther wrote, "They set up a man of straw whom they may attack." Okay, that's a straw man argument. These are things that are not at stake. The core doctrines and disciplines of the United Methodist Church, not only will they not change, they cannot change. The articles of religion, our basic articles expressing our belief in the Trinity, the divinity of Christ, the resurrection, the virgin birth, all these things, and many more, those articles of religion were penned by Wesley's own hands. And they're in a part of the discipline where you can't even change them with a simple majority at General Conference. So you have to and the basic doctrines of our church are the same way. It would take a 2/3 majority vote at General Conference, followed by a 3/4 aggregate vote of every annual conferences and all their members all around the world to change it. They ain't going to change. Okay? Now, somebody thinks a certain way. That's true in every denomination. You always have folks who may not be sure about the virgin birth. They're on a journey with Christ, and we embrace them. But those are our core, they will not change. I don't know a single person who plans to stay in the United Methodist Church who wants to give up on our basic core beliefs about the divinity of Christ or something of that nature. John Wesley said, in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, in all things, charity. Those are essentials, and they're not going to change. So that's a myth. I want to bust that myth. Myth busting number two. Myth number two is that extreme examples represent the whole. I'm sure you've heard some story about a crazy Methodist preacher somewhere that said something or did something. You heard of YouTube. I got on YouTube the other day, and I listened to a Southern Baptist pastor who got up there and started yelling about how all Democrats are going to hell, and they needed to get out of this church. Now, do you think all Southern Baptists preach that? No, he's a nut. He's crazy. Baptists don't even like this guy. All right? No, he's a nut. You're going to have a nut in every denomination. Our denomination has 12.5 million members. To pick one example and exalt it and exaggerate it and build it into a narrative if that's what everybody's going to be like is not only untrue and unfair, it's just wrong. I don't think all Baptists are like that crazy preacher I heard on TV. If you leave the United Methodist Church, You're not leaving the nuts, because in any denomination, if you shake a certain tree, a nut will fall out, okay? You're leaving the main body. And so that's something to consider. Sometimes it's not even true. I did a little myth busting of my own. I had heard that a bunch of people at Duke Divinity School prayed to the queer God in their chapel. Have you heard this one? I saw it. Okay, yeah. All right. You saw the video. Before they took it down. Well, did you know that the administration had no idea that was going to happen? It was not run by or attended by any faculty. And most of the students that prayed in that way were not United Methodist. I checked into this. So the idea that that's just what some students did, okay, without the faculty knowing. That's like some crazy teenagers in your church fellowship hall said something that you didn't know they were going to say, okay? Here's another one. I heard that a bishop out west was teaching against the divinity of Christ, that she didn't believe in the divinity of Christ. I said, that's not true. There's no way that's true. And they said, oh, yes, it is true. This person argued with me. Oh, it's true. I got proof. I said, you got proof? Hey, what's the proof? And he said, well, the proof is that she said we treat Jesus like an idol and that he's human and he was a bigot. I said, all right. That's not proof yet because I haven't seen what she said exactly. And I would say Jesus was human, and I would say that we shouldn't treat him like an idol. So can you show me the context? Well, they showed me her actual Bible study, and I read it very carefully. There was absolutely no statement that was heretical or against the divinity of Jesus. It was a Bible study on the Syrophoenician or the Canaanite woman who came to Jesus, and she had asked for healing, and Jesus said something to the effect of, it's not right to give to the dogs what should be on the children's table. And she says, oh, but, she had faith. She said, oh, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs from under the table. And Jesus honored her faith. And this bishop was saying, why did Jesus imply that she was a dog? Well, that would have been a customary way to think because of the bigotry of his culture at the time. And he spoke in that way, and when he saw her faith, even Jesus grew to the moment and realized where she was. Because Jesus was fully human. And it's not that he made a mistake, but it's that he was growing in that conversation. There's nothing heretical about this statement. She didn't say Jesus wasn't divine. In fact, and I really challenged the person who brought this to me, I said, historic theology teaches that Jesus was fully divine and fully human. So if you're telling me that Jesus wasn't fully human, you're the one who's heretical. Of course he was human. And that's a valid explanation of why he spoke in that way. So check your facts. That's what I'm saying. When you hear something, don't just listen to the little snippet. Check the facts. Behind it may not be what you think there is. So they're extreme examples, and some people may be wrong and may say things you don't agree with. I promise you, my preacher said something I don't agree with is not enough reason to leave a denomination. Right, Mike? Because you're going to have a lot of, exactly. All right. Myth number 3, and I'll try to go a little faster, but those were the two big ones. Myth number 3, we're all going to take a hard left on social issues. No, we will continue to be a diverse denomination. Traditional, centrist, and progressive United Methodists will always continue to be diverse. One thing you can expect is diversity of thought. We've never been like-minded. I mean, my mother and dad weren't even like-minded and didn't agree on everything. You get a congregation together, you're not going to agree on everything. We don't feel like we have to agree on everything. That's why I love the United Methodist Church. Part of our DNA is we agree on the ways of love. Did you know that the United Methodist Church is the most evenly widespread denomination in the United States? Have you ever thought about this? The one Protestant denomination that's larger than us is called Southern Baptist. Well, that tells you something. Not that there aren't Southern Baptist churches in California, but there's very few. Okay? The Catholic Church is larger than our denomination, but how many Catholics live around here in this county? Okay, I mean, they're not big everywhere, right? Would you say they're the largest church around here? No. Okay, so most churches are regional. The United Methodist Church is the most even. Almost every zip code in the United States has a United Methodist Church in it. Now, is that a problem or is that an opportunity? I think of that as an opportunity to be the church. And I like that about our church. So naturally, we're going to have disagreements over something or other going on in our culture. We always have, we always will. Diversity on issues, especially when they're not really, gospel issues, is what I like. One of my favorite photographs that I've ever seen was a picture of George W. Bush and Hillary Clinton hugging at George's father's funeral and smiling and laughing. Guess what? Both of them are United Methodists. Do they agree on everything? Hillary Clinton and George Bush? No. But they're both United Methodists. And I like that about our church. Myth number 4. Yeah, we won't take a hard left. We'll continue to be diverse. Myth number 4, we don't know what the United Methodist Church will look like in 10 years. Now, the funny thing about this one I hear is, how do you know what the GMC is going to look like in 10 years? You've rewritten the temporary discipline 4 times, and as a caveat in it that says it's temporary, and you haven't even organized yet. So you're telling me you don't know what we're going to look like in 10 years? I don't know what you're going to look like in 10 years. Well, the thing I try to remind people, it is always true. Nobody knows what anything's going to be like in 10 years, but we have more track record than a denomination that doesn't exist or a collection of independent churches that doesn't exist. You have no idea what that'll look like except promises. I do know this. The United Methodist Church has been through tough times before. We had tough times over slavery, and it involved a split, over evolution, over women's suffrage, over temperance, over segregation, over female clergy. Never once did our denomination go off the deep end afterwards. And we won't now. Okay? That's myth number 4, that you don't know what it'll look like in 10 years. Myth number 5 is that the only reason that a breakaway group is leaving is that those people are not following the discipline. All right, there are a few cases. I'm not going to lie to you. There are a few cases where people have objected to certain aspects of the discipline, and out of their sense, their personal sense, whether you agree with it or not, their sense of obedience to Christ, they've defied the discipline. Now, I've always followed the discipline. It's the covenant. I made a promise. I made a vow. It's like the vow I took when I married my wife. I take that vow very seriously. But I've also discovered that whether I agree with some of the protest methods or not, it's not because they don't care about the discipline or they disregard the whole discipline. It's because they do care about the discipline that they're protesting. In the last 3 years, there's been an abeyance over any trials, over any misbehavior. And you can't count that because the last few years, all parties, including the WCA, agreed to an abeyance of trials and charges, okay? So while this is a fair criticism of a few cases in the far left, I want you to see that the schism has been planned by the far right for a long time. I'm going to share, I don't have one for everybody, but I'm just going to bestow it upon your pastor. This is a document from 2004, an internal document from the Good News outlining their strategy, which involved a long-term strategy of rejecting any compromise, trying to get the people on the far left to leave, and if that didn't work, they were going to leave themselves. Since 2004, that has been the plan, okay? I'll give you a little more personal connection. Some of you know I wrote a letter that went viral in February of 2020 about why I'm going to stay in the United Methodist Church. And it was after a meeting at Clear Branch. Well, I believe in Matthew 18, which means the first way to deal with something is not writing a public letter. It's going to that person privately first. What you don't know is for the 18 months prior to that, I had been writing the president of the North Alabama Conference Wesley Covenant Association, WCA, and telling him, hey, you're sending out letters and communication saying that you're going to work to overturn the one church plan and make sure the traditional plan passes, and you're probably going to leave the church eventually anyway. I cannot agree to that strategy because you're planning to leave. Why are you not trying to work with what the bishops are trying to do? Why are you trying to overturn it, make the rules more stringent when you're planning to leave just so you can say that those people aren't following the rules you just cracked down on when you're going to leave anyway? I did not have any respect for an end game of leaving, okay? So I want you to know that nobody's been perfect. It is a mess, and it's not something that is caused by some problem in the United Methodist Church. It's because culture wars have dumped themselves on all the denominations. You don't think Southern Baptists are having problems right now? Do you know any Baptist friends? Have you asked them about Beth Moore and Rick Warren, and they're arguing about women in ministry again, and the last 10 years they've lost 1 million members, and they're having a big disagreement over the alliance between certain Republicans and the leadership of the Southern Baptist Convention. They're having lots of problems because we have cultural issues. I want to stand up and say to you that by binding ourselves to Christ, we can make it through that. Nobody's been perfect in all this. All I can be is responsible for me. So I make my decisions based on my faith in Christ and my home in God's church. And I believe in working toward unity because Jesus believed in working toward unity. In John 17, Jesus prayed for unity. He said, your unity is going to be because I'm in unity with my Father. Christ is the answer, and I want to stay with the 80 or 85% of the UMC in America that plans to stay. UMC who knows in our bones that our only way forward is Jesus Christ. So there you go. That's myth number 5. And I'll be real brief on myth number 6. Myth number 6 is you better get out now. Okay? In that letter from the NAC3 team that just came out in August, the bishop specifies that churches have always been able to disaffiliate if for some reason they felt led to disaffiliate. There's methods to do that. Essentially what you do, I know in one case a church got to being just a couple of families. It got kind of small, but they didn't want to be United Methodist anymore. And they went to the district superintendent and said, hey, we don't want to be United Methodist anymore. How do we disaffiliate? And the district superintendent closed the church, closed the church, and let them reform as an independent church, and then sold them the property for $10. Okay. There's ways you can disaffiliate if by some stretch of the imagination down the road you wanted to disaffiliate or your descendants wanted to disaffiliate. This is not prison that you're trying to break out of, okay? This idea that you better get out now is a myth. Now, to get out now, according to the provisions in paragraph 2553 passed at General Conference in 2019, yes, that has a deadline. But there may be future legislation, even if there's not. The NAC3 letter explains to you how churches disaffiliated up until now. There's a church up near where I served in Arab that had disaffiliated 20 years ago. Now, I don't know how they did the specifics, but there's ways that you could do that. If things go the way that your worst imagination would lead. But I don't think it will anyway. The other thing is that WestPath, which is the organization that controls all the pensions of pastors. They hold my pensions from my 33 years of ministry. I'm really glad I have a pension, in front of me when I do retire. When the WestPath has announced they're bringing up legislation for the 2024 General Conference that would allow a church like yours, if your church chose to disaffiliate, but you kept your pastor in the Westpath pension program, you wouldn't have to pay out your pension liabilities because you're carrying the liability with the next pastor. So there's going to be ways to make decisions. Unless your church is 100% sure about what you have to do right now, if that's true, go for it, do it. But if you're not, there's no rush. Okay, there's no deadline. Now, having said all that, everybody take a deep breath. Let's move past the myth busting. And I might have said something you disagree with. I understand that. I accept that. That's okay. Thank you for letting me speak on behalf of the United Methodist Church. Let me close with this. Let me give you a vision for what I think it'll look like to be a traditional United Methodist Church and stay in the United Methodist Church. I'll start by telling you about the church I serve. My church is a medium-sized church, 600 and something members. Before COVID, they had 200 on Sundays, After COVID, we have 150 on Sundays and 50 people, I think, who are watching on live stream. You know how it is, So it's a nice-sized church, not big, not small. They're right there, literally contiguous to JSU campus. Go Gamecocks, Fear the Beak. I know all this stuff, all right? I'm going to the games. I love the Marching Southerners. We're right there. About half of our congregation is somehow connected with Fort McClellan, or they're retired from the Army Depot, or they're retired military. About half of my congregation are teachers and professors at the school. You can imagine they don't agree on everything politically, okay? During the first 5 minutes of my first 5 conversations when I got to that church, somebody said something like, what I love about our church is that it's 50-50. We got Republicans, Democrats. So they'll say we have conservatives and liberals, whatever the terms they would use. And they say, we like that. In fact, the first 5 people told me the same story. In fact, we had a Sunday school class that used to have the chair of the Democratic Party in Calhoun County and the chair of the Republican Party in Calhoun County. They were both in the same Sunday school class, and they alternated teaching. They loved that diversity. Last year, I shared with them some of the things going on about a year ago, plus a couple of months in the summer, and when I showed them the things going on in the denomination, they decided we're not going to do any kind of discernment process. We want to stay in the UMC because we want to be diverse. So they have chosen not to even entertain a discernment process, the church that I serve. And that was their decision, not mine. Some of the more conservative members of our church, after the GMC announced their starting in this past May, came to me and said, please tell the church that we're not going to enter the discernment process because that was, and I'm using their words, preemptive and premature. We don't want to be a part of something we don't know what it is. The discipline hasn't changed. Why should we leave? Okay, that's my church's decision. And we sat and talked, and they said, we want to be a traditional church where everybody's welcome. All right? We'll be traditional in our practices, but if somebody walks through that door, we're going to love them. We're not going to judge them. We're not going to hate them. We're not going to exclude them. We're going to love them. We got out our wedding policies. I kid you not, this was a 10-minute decision at a board meeting. We got out our wedding policies and noticed that they didn't specifically mention in the wedding policies that we only did weddings between one man and one woman. So they changed that. I mean, it's in the discipline anyway. But their thought was, well, if that ever does change and they give churches a decision, we'll just go ahead and have that codified. So if in 50 years they want to change it, they can, but it's not going to be automatic. And that was the end of the discussion. You can be a traditional church and stay in the UMC. Though we cannot think alike, may we not all love alike, Wesley said. Again, they chose not to be in the discernment process. No plan has ever been presented that says churches can't remain as traditional as they want to be, and annual conferences and their boards of ordained ministry can't be as traditional as they want to be. Okay? What the bishop has described in the letter that I handed out to you, plus the 3 letters previous, and on the resource list I gave you, you can find links. They're kind of long. Just look at the annual conference website. I'm afraid it's a little bit buried there, but you can find it there. You can find all of those letters. They describe a vision of streams of traditional and centrist and progressive churches within the North Alabama Conference. Now, there aren't very many churches in the North Alabama Conference that I would consider progressive, truly progressive. Out of 650 churches, maybe 7, 8 would I consider just a purely progressive church. And Tommy knows this, they're mostly down in Birmingham, you know. But most churches are traditional or centrist, you know, and would self-identify that way. And the vision of streams is that churches would be given a way to self-identify. We're a more traditional church or we're a centrist church. And you'll be able to network with each other and learn from each other. And that would be respected when appointments are made, all under the discipline of the United Methodist Church. Now, and they'll try their best to make a good match. Now, the appointment system's not perfect. But they gave you Mike. Well, sorry, but the appointment system is here to try to give you the best person they can. If you leave the United Methodist Church, when Mike leaves, you're going to have to find your own pastor. Okay? So it's a big and important decision. The key word for the vision that they're casting is what I call contextualization. There's different contexts. Childersburg, Alabama is different than inner city Birmingham, Alabama, which is different from Jacksonville, Alabama. We have different. And North Alabama is different from California or New York. We have different conferences in different parts of the country with different local churches. Again, it's like states' rights, but within the conference, you're going to have different streams, and they will respect that when appointments are made, all under the discipline. So I'm here to share my heart with you, and just to close and ask, we'll do some Q&A. There are so many things I love about the United Methodist Church. Now, it is true that I'm the child of a United Methodist pastor. Dad started preaching when he was 17. And when he was 85, he called me on the phone, and he said, you know, I've retired 7 times, but this time I'm quitting, he said. That's the truth, isn't it? That was 5 years ago. His father was a pastor, and my mother's father was a pastor. Have had uncles and cousins who are pastors. Both my dad and mom were descended from circuit riders in North Georgia or North Alabama. It is true that it's my home for a lot of reasons, but most of all, I want you to know why I continue to make it my home. I love the United Methodist Church. I love Sumatanga. We can do things together that we can't do by ourselves. And I love the ministry. It's nurtured me in so many ways. I love UMCOR, United Methodist Committee on Relief. You know, we have our own UMCOR warehouse in Decatur that serves the whole region of the Southeast. And the UMCOR is the greatest relief organization in the world because 100% of what you give to UMCOR goes directly to relief. There's no overhead. We pay for that with our tithes and our connection giving to the regular church. It's the most wonderful, you know, if you give to a relief organization on TV, how much of the money actually gets to relief and how much of it pays for advertising? You know, it's wonderful, and they're the first ones in, they're the last ones out. I live in Jacksonville where there was a tornado. Now it's been 3 or 4 years. They came in, the local church developed a relief center. It was resourced by the one in Decatur. UMCOR came in. This past year, there was a little church called Reagan Chapel in Alexandria that was hit by a tornado. It just leveled. You may have seen that. Before that tornado hit, that church was thinking about leaving the United Methodist Church. But when that tornado hit, UMCOR showed up. And my church, who had been through a tornado in Jacksonville, showed up with chainsaws and with lunch. And Goshen United Methodist Church, who has their own story of tornadoes, showed up. And they started seeing what it means to be a connectional church. I'm proud to say their pastor is now going through the licensing process. They're going to stay in the United Methodist Church. They've seen what UMCOR can do to bring us all together. I love the Methodist Church. I live near Wesley Foundation. It's one of the ways. It's a big deal in Jacksonville. I love that. I love the fact that our annual conference offering this year took a $75,000 offering. Many churches, if not most, participated in it to do something about the war in Ukraine, the unjust war between Russia and the Ukraine, and do something about those refugees instead of just saying thoughts and prayers on Facebook. We actually did something, and we collected that, and we sent that money through local churches, United Methodist churches, in other parts of the Baltic states that we had started from 2 sets of missionaries from our conference, the Fridays and the Clems. We're connected church. Could we have found a way in some other way? And by the way, the Worldwide United Methodist Church added to that $75,000 and collected $27 million for Ukrainian refugees this past year. You can't do that as an independent church. You just can't. I love the Upper Room. That little book has changed people's lives all over the world in 45 countries. They sell 1 million copies. I love the programs that the Upper Room sales provides. How many of you have been to the Walk to Emmaus? That was brought to you by, guess what? The United Methodist Church, the office the Academy for Spiritual Formation changed my life. Emmaus changed my life. The United Methodist Church gave us all these things as well as your pastor. So I love the United Methodist Church. I love Methodist spirituality. We're a faith of head, heart, and hands. I think it's the balance that you don't find elsewhere. We take the Bible seriously, but we don't read it like fundamentalists. We interpret it through tradition, reason, and experience. We believe science and faith are compatible. We're not opposites. We believe in the grace of God and the love of Christ that draws us to God instead of trying to force everybody or manipulate people into being Christians out of fear of hell and damnation. I love the fact that it's about relationship with Christ and that God's never finished with us. And holiness doesn't mean you better get your act right before God. It means falling in love with Jesus and then letting His love just ooze from who you are. I want to suggest that your church can be traditional and stay in the United Methodist Church. There's too much to be lost by leaving. I know I've gone to preaching, but I'm almost done. How can you truly be who you are? By becoming something else. And then finally, I'm going to stay in the United Methodist Church because I have a heart for young people. I recognize that churches are leaving over their convictions. I get that. I honor that. But here's what I'm convicted about. Statistically speaking, young people have been leaving all the churches in droves because of their perception of intolerance. It's statistically proven. Methodism was in early America far from an intolerant religion. It spread in the masses with regular frontier folk, and it spread like crazy because they weren't the people of highfalutin society and educated Englishmen who looked right and acted right. They were on the frontier. Just bring people to Jesus and let Jesus sort out their life. That's why it spread. We need to get back to that, where all are welcome. You do what you're led to do as a church. I'm inviting you to stay traditional, to stay in and stay focused on making disciples. I promise you nobody is going to tell your church you can't be traditional. No one's going to tell your pastor you can't be traditional. That's not in any plan. And I believe the United Methodist Church does have a bright future. Now, we're in the middle of a divorce, and nobody enjoys being in the middle of a divorce. But when we're past it, the churches will move on, and both parties will move forward, and we will have a good future together. I'm more concerned about the unchurched people in the world than the people within the church I disagree with. Let's do something for those people. In the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I will stop preaching now. Okay? Take a breath, and I do know some stuff about all this. I'll be glad to answer any questions or thoughts. Yes. Oh, okay.
Because we are recording it.
Okay. All right. So other people are going to listen. That's good. That's good. Sure. Flip the switch.
Thank you for your time and for coming to speak to us tonight. And you made a reference, and I couldn't copy it down fast enough, of a video on YouTube by, is it Tom Brady?
Tom Berlin,
Berlin.
like the capital of Germany.
I didn't think so, but that's what I wrote.
Tom Brady you can watch on YouTube.
Well, but this is a YouTube, Tom Berlin,
Right.
YouTube video.
Actually, I'm not sure if it's on YouTube or Venmo, but if you look at the link I put in your resource list.
Okay, it's in there. Okay, thank you for your time, and I appreciate you coming.
If you're going to watch one video from my perspective, that's one.
Hey, Steve, thanks for coming. I had a question, and I want to make a statement.
Sure.
What is the date that the revised Book of Discipline is due to come out?
Do you mean for the United Methodist Church or the GMC discipline?
Our Book of Discipline that we use.
All right.
It's being revised. When is that due date?
Okay. Every 4 years except for COVID. Ignore COVID for a second. Every 4 years, General Conference gathers, and every 4 years they revise the discipline. And there's a legislative process, kind of like Congress. Okay. So the next one is 2024, but it never was done in 2020. Is what I'm saying. There's going to be an 8-year gap because of COVID.
Okay.
But the
Now,
next
my
is 2024.
statement, my concern, I am concerned of what the new Book of Discipline is going to have in it.
Okay. What mistake of concern?
And I'm a Methodist, have been all my life, and I can live with the Book of Discipline that we've been operating on for years and years. But, I hear things that drastic changes are going to be made when the new Book of Discipline is revised. And what can you say about that?
I would be glad to entertain that. I don't think there's going to be dramatic changes in 2024, and here's my reason. Africans are still conservative, and they always will be, and they will have most of the votes in 2024. If there are changes, there'll be changes in structure, how we make decisions in the future. There will be legislation proposed, but there has been legislation proposed to change things since 1972. There's always legislation proposed. I don't think it's going to change dramatically in 2024 if you just count votes. But the people who are leaving are sure it's going to change. But that's where you probably heard that. Sure.
This is good. Steve, thank you for coming.
He just needs one mic.
Yeah, I don't,
He doesn't need any.
I don't need any,
Okay.
just to be honest with you. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
I truly believe that what you said tonight, you believe everything you
I
said.
do believe everything I said.
And I totally agree with that. My issue is, born and raised in this church, Methodist all my life. Been here for 70 years. Now, either God sent me the wrong copy of the Bible and sent somebody else another copy of the Bible. But I believe in what the Bible says.
Sure, so do I.
All right, I don't believe in a gay marriage. I don't believe that gays should be at the pulpit. And I'm going to stand by that. I'm going to stand by what I learned in this church, and I'm not going to waver.
I understand that.
End of the statement.
Yeah. What I'm saying to you today is you wouldn't have to change.
Well, I'm saying, do I want to be connected? Do I want to be with a church that half their members are going to believe that?
That's a good question.
Or I want to stand up for what God put in this Bible He taught me. That's all I got to say.
Absolutely. And that's a fair statement. And that is the question.
And that is the question.
Any other questions? We do appreciate you being here. Hey, wait, use the mic.
Use a microphone. It's being recorded.
Me on, I've got one.
Okay.
My big question comes from the perspective of the pastor as far as this process goes. And thus far in the last 7 years, we've, as United Methodists, have showed very wishy-washy at best when it comes to accountability to the discipline. And I think for a lot of people, that is the biggest concern, is moving forward. What guarantees would there be that the discipline would actually be upheld? I know in the last, was it 3 or 4 years, we've kind of had that ceasefire as far as and that's fine. But previous to that, there were plenty of opportunities. I don't even say opportunities, this is the bad term, but areas where that accountability should have. It was done, and then another group gets involved, and it gets turned, and it gets. But when you look at what is written in the discipline, it literally, it is black and white. You know, they've written it in such a way to where there's not a lot of ambiguity to it. That it's, here is what we do, but yet even up to that point, the accountability has not withstood the culture wars, I guess is the best way. Moving forward, there's no guarantees that will. So the discipline can say whatever it wants to say, but if there's not that overarching, hey, there's going to be accountability to these things, then we're back to where we are now. And from a pastor's point of view, that's my greatest concern.
I get that,
and
sure.
I know that's a concern that's been voiced to me by several of the folks in this congregation.
And as a centrist, some of that mess does bother me, of course, too.
Yeah.
I'm aware, I will make 2 comments. One is I'm aware that that's because of culture wars. It's not because there's something wrong with our system. Okay. The second thing I would say is that when you go into a new denomination, you will also have people who disobey the rules. So how are you going to deal with that? Because that's the reality in today's world.
Well, that's where option 3 comes in.
Right. What's option 3?
Solo!
Oh, yeah? And if you go independent, you're not connected with anybody. So
That's the downside.
Good luck finding a new pastor too. But I'm just saying that is the, and I think everybody wants to get to a place where we all abide by the discipline, including people who are progressive. They're not trying to change us. I want to make that very clear. They're just wanting the freedom to do what they need to do in their church. Okay? So, now I'm not saying I agree with their methods, but I'm just telling you, the people in California don't care what we do in Childersburg. But apparently, we care what they do in California. And there it is. Okay, there's the conflict. I do think that I believe in the wheat and the tare. Jesus said, don't pull up, try to pull the weeds out of the wheat and the tare. Wait till it's all harvested, and the fine wheat will be taken up, and the tare will be burned. I'll let God be in charge of that. If it works out, it works. If it doesn't, all I can be in charge of is how I minister. I do think there's, it is a common criticism by people right now, lack of accountability. All right. That was also, I'm not excusing that. I'm not dismissing that. But that's also just one way to look at it. Because before the abeyance in the last 3 years, there were trials and people were put on trial. That is accountability. They would do things they weren't match the discipline. They were put on trial. If they were given a failed trial, that's accountability, and that was happening all the time. Some people leaving make it sound like there's no accountability. Well, that's not true. We used to have trials all the time. You just didn't know about them. And annual conferences dealt with them on the annual conference level. So I would disagree that there was no accountability. I do think there was protest and trying their best to find change. But I'm not agreeing with all that, but that's how you change something. That's civil disobedience. That's how segregation changed. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but I'm saying that's why doing that, you know. That is a valid thing. You know, what is our accountability? I believe that the church wants to, the one church plan was designed for all of us to be, now it didn't pass, okay, but it was designed for all of us to be under one discipline. In different parts of the country can make some leeway on certain things that we all agree on, the leeway. And it was intended to change that so that we'd all be under the one discipline instead of what we say and what we write being two different things. One of the most troubling things about the new GMC Book of Doctrines and Disciplines, I've read all 4 versions, so I've read it very carefully. One of the most troubling things in there that I see is that the transitional committee that oversees everything can summarily kick your church out if they don't think you're following their beliefs. We don't have such a thing in the United Methodist Church. The bishop can't kick you out because you don't agree with something. I can't live in a covenant like that, you know, Big Brother's going to come kick me out because your church doesn't quite agree with something that wound up in their discipline. So that's too much accountability. All right. These are good questions. Thank you, Mike. Any other questions? Yes? Yeah.
Not a religion of rules. Well, I worked my whole life for an organization that, you know, we had rules, and if we disobeyed the rules, then we were sued, and we lost, and rightfully so. We should have. You talked about, I believe you said contextualization. Does that mean that you can pretty much make your own rules?
No, that's not what contextualization means.
You said you would have leeway.
Yeah.
And I think the leeway may mean gay pastors, it may mean gay marriages, it may mean more than that somewhere down the road. But rules are there for a reason, and
Right.
that's the reason we have a discipline that we have. And lastly, can you put in writing the $10?
Oh, yeah, that would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, if we get that now, then
Right.
we could make a decision.
Well, the thing, and I appreciate what you have said. I'll go back to what I said about states' rights. The Supreme Court didn't make abortion illegal. What they did was in an organized, thank you. You're a nice guy.
Contrary to popular belief.
Yeah, thank you. They orchestrated a way to make the decision differently. Okay, that's what contextualization is. It's not do your own rules. It's we're going to organize the United Methodist Church a certain way that these are the things that we decide together. These are the things that different parts of the world can decide for themselves.
And that would be decided in 2024 with the new discipline?
I doubt if that would happen in 2024. But again, every discipline changes. So to say, is the discipline going to change? Every discipline changes.
There's no doubt the discipline would change, but if in contextualization you are responsible to live within the discipline,
Right.
then it's our responsibility to have a say-so in the discipline and
Which
how
we
it's
do.
changed. And if it changes to a point where we just can't live with it, like has been stated already, at that point, then a decision could be
Oh
made.
yeah, the church, a church can disaffiliate at any time. There's no deadline.
For $10.
I wish I could give you that deal.
Hey,
I wish I could promise that.
I'm sorry, but I wrote the $10 down.
You want the
in my
$10,
notes already.
okay. You want the $10.
we have brought up Roe versus Wade several times. The Council of Bishops, Methodist Church, the ones that will be basically appointing our new bishop if we get a new bishop. Did you read what they put out about Roe versus Wade?
Okay, first of all, they don't appoint bishops, but yeah, go ahead with your thought, and then I'll clarify that.
They don't have input to it? Okay, that's good. I go to a meeting every 5 years, so I figure
Right.
something out.
I'll tell you how it happens, but finish your thought.
But anyway, so we're, you know, if in fact some liberal-leaning appointees come up, our next bishop may not be middle of the road or in the stream that we're in, is the way I see it.
Okay.
But did you read the press release from the Council of Bishops?
Was it very recently? I'm trying to remember.
Yes, it was after Roe versus Wade was overturned, which basically give it back to the states. They came out and what a travesty. What a
Okay.
travesty.
Well, okay. I haven't read it.
Say what they said. You say.
Oh, I can't remember. I can't.
All right.
Hey, I don't even know where I parked my car,
Gotcha.
you know.
Well, I will say, and those are valid concerns. I don't remember that particular document, so I can't say. But I will say a couple of things. First is, if you read what the Methodist social principles say about abortion, it's a moderate, with some caveats, pro-life statement.
That's right. And,
Okay.
and the bishop's statement didn't align with what was in the, one of our last meetings, we had some handouts we
Okay.
passed out, and it didn't align necessarily
Okay, I
with
don't
the
know
book of
that.
discipline.
But I will
And
make a
that's from
couple
the
of notes.
leadership. The
Yeah.
leadership is not agreeing with the book
Right.
of discipline in their press releases to the whole world.
I would have to read it myself to determine whether I think it disagreed. But I will say this. First of all, the bishops have absolutely no input into the book of discipline. They don't have a vote at General Conference of any kind. Their job is to officiate the proceedings. So bishops don't have any vote whatsoever as to what's in the book of discipline. Second thing I want to correct about what you first said, bishops are not sent by bishops. The way bishops are elected is they're elected in the Southeast, and this is going to help, I think, traditional churches to stay in the UMC. The Southeastern United States is in what's called the Southeast jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction is where you elect bishops. So we won't get a bishop from Minnesota or California or New York. We'll get a bishop from Kentucky or Virginia or Mississippi, okay? Because bishop candidates are from within your jurisdiction. So any bishop you get, you may or may not agree with them, but they're from the Bible Belt, okay? You just need to know that. That was actually created in 1939 as a compromise when the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church South, and the Methodist Protestant Church joined together, because Southern churches didn't want bishops from out in California coming and pushing desegregation. I'm telling you the truth. So the jurisdictional conferences were created to give the regions of the church a little bit of autonomy, which we still have. Okay, so you're not going to get a bishop that is anything but Southern. Okay, that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is they're appointed by a committee that once the bishops are elected, there's a committee that has representatives from each and every conference. 2 representatives, a lay and a clergy person from our conference, will be sitting at that table, and they negotiate which bishop goes to which place, and it's laity and clergy together, and they kind of go back in this room and figure out who's the best bishop for what situation after they're elected, and then they assign them. So the bishops don't have any control over it, and an individual bishop doesn't have any control. They're like a pastor. They don't know where they're going to go. So, yeah.
Just because someone's below the Mason-Dixon doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be conservative.
Sure.
All right, because, I mean, the North Georgia bishop, from the writings I've read, is very progressive. All right, and like I said, we have in Alabama, our 2 bishops, I guess now being served by 1 bishop. The whole thing's confusing to me. But we're very blessed with what we've had. The last thing is, and Peter brought it up before, it's very appealing, these streams of consciousness that you can choose which stream you want to be in. What guarantee do we have that that's going to be approved, especially with a new bishop coming in?
All right, first of all, I'm going to respond to 2 things that you said. The first one is the North Georgia bishop. The people who are leaving the denomination accuse the North Georgia bishop of being liberal. I would contest that statement. What she was is hard-nosed about one church leaving without following the rules. Okay? Mount Bethel Church, their largest church, wanted to leave the denomination without following the protocols, without following the rules, without following the discipline. They refused the reappointment of their pastor They denied the appointment of a new pastor. He turned in his orders and they hired him. You can't do that and be United Methodist. So they broke the rules, and she was hard-nosed about it. That's all she did, and she's accused of being liberal. Okay, so I don't think she's written any. If you show me something she actually wrote, I'll talk to you whether it's liberal. But that's where what she was is hard on the people who are leaving. Okay, what was the second thing you said? Okay. If you look carefully at the most recent letter from the NAC3 team, it'll confirm what I've been told, which is that the process belongs to the conference trustees, not the bishop. Okay? The annual conference has a board of trustees that are elected. They're not hand-selected by any bishop. They're elected at annual conference with a nomination process similar to your church. Your church has a nomination process, and your pastor leads it. But the pastor doesn't control it, okay? You have a nominations process. You nominate your people for your church council or whatever you call it, administrative board, whatever you might call it here. They are elected by the church conference, okay? Annual conference elects the trustees, and they control this NAC3 plan. So it can't be changed by a bishop any more than your church policies can be changed by a pastor. Well, yeah, I mean, they could try to change it, but they have to go through your board, okay? So the trustees own the process, and that's one reason they made sure to go ahead and try to get some of this concluded before our bishop could leave, but they wanted to get it all in motion so we're used to everything before she leaves, because that's how it is going to continue. So, yeah.
I would like to say before we leave that I've been around here a long time, maybe not as long as most, but I don't know anybody in this church that would turn anyone away under any circumstances.
Well, you want to keep that.
And it's always been that way. I trust it'll always be that way. I think we're talking about rules and leadership. We're not talking about accepting people into this church. We always have, regardless of who they are, what their backgrounds. If this church didn't accept sinners, we probably wouldn't have anybody here at all.
I believe right now. So, yeah.
All right. Well, Steve, appreciate you.
Okay,
coming.
Tommy had a question.
Oh,
If you can take one more.
You're not supposed to look at
I
me.
know, but I know him.
Hey, Steve, thanks.
He's been on some of this stuff with me.
Yeah, too much of it. I thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Also, I'd mentioned we were at Nina's house 10 days ago, and
Nina Reeves?
Nina Reeves,
Really?
97 years old. Not going to be with us much longer,
No,
and she
she's
knows
not.
it. She knows it. She had your book on her table right
Did she?
beside. I thought I'd share that with
I
you.
sent it to her.
I know,
Yeah.
she told me, and she said to give you her best. I told her you're
Thank
going
you.
to be here, unfortunately, but we're going to try to survive it. That's what I
There
told
you
her. No, she's. I was curious about your feeling about churches going through what we're going through now, and how your church decided not to have disaffiliation, to go through what we're going through. How did you decide that, and why do you think, if you do, that's the best way to go without going through what we're going through, to understand the process and all that's happening within Methodism?
Well, we had two big sort of town hall type meetings last summer and presented all the information at that time. Of course, we didn't have the information that the GMC had actually formed, but we did tell them that they probably would at some point, you know. And it was sort of group consensus. Everybody who came to the public meetings, you know, just conversed with each other and kept conversing afterwards. And then at a church council meeting, it was, you know, when we brought it up, they said, we don't want to go through a discernment process. We don't need to do that. So it was sort of informal, but it did involve some town meetings when a lot of information was given out. And it wasn't just from me. We have a layperson named Connie Thompson who went through a training with the district on how to talk about difficult things, and she led the conversations last summer. So a decision not to go through a discernment process is a decision. Yeah.
I had one comment, and you can, and it sort of goes along with what Mally had to say, but you mentioned that Gospels didn't have anything to say about homosexuality,
That is correct.
but the Old Testament and the letters of Paul
Sure
do
they do.
have specific things.
Sure they do.
And I can't discount just certain portions because because they're difficult or they don't say. And so I think for most of us, we look at the Bible as a whole, and I'm not saying that we say, stone the person next to you if they commit adultery.
Well, it does say that.
It does
If your
say
children disobey you, you should stone
It
them
does
to
say
death.
that, but this is not that kind of an issue. And so
Right.
I think that's where people really get down to the issue. And I think, for me, the openly gay pastors are more of an issue than even a gay marriage, because there are going to be gay marriages, civil gay marriages, and that's going to exist, and I'm with you. We're going to love people that walk in this church.
They are going to walk through this door.
And we're going to love people, and we do.
And I'll fight to the death for that one.
Yeah, we do. But that's where it becomes a matter of conviction, I guess, for each individual.
Yeah, I get that. And I do, it is important to interpret those passages well. I do think it's conspicuous that Jesus didn't mention it. Here's one of the things I often say. What Jesus does talk about is divorce and remarriage being adultery. Okay. So if you treat that one as okay, but not homosexuality, you're choosing that based on culture wars, not what it says in the Bible. Because it's more clear in the Bible that Jesus spoke against divorce and remarriage. And he called it adultery, which is in the Ten Commandments, which we're not talking about the Ten Commandments. Okay. So for him, that was a bigger issue. Yet, we treat that with grace because we depend on grace. The same grace we use here needs to apply to this. Otherwise, we're picking and choosing what we're being graceful about. I believe in trusting in the grace of God to redeem me of my sin.
But we do have guidelines.
Sure.
We do have strict, pretty strong guidelines.
Divorce and remarriage is a lot different than same-sex, because
Sure,
God
it's different.
created both
Sure, it's different.
for a reason.
My question is, do we offer grace or not? And bring people to Christ. That's it.
But that does not mean we necessarily want that person in the pulpit.
Sure. Well, I can tell you that not every pastor is fit to be in your pulpit for 100 different reasons. Yeah, Mike's, there's some things that, I don't know how you put up with him, but that's true. I don't see why our conference would ever want to send you the pastor that this is the wrong person for you. Have they done that before on purpose? They might have done it accidentally. Okay.
Maybe two.
Okay. There's always, you don't know if it'll work out, and it doesn't. But-
Which ended
Right,
up being fine.
Right, okay. Thank y'all for the time.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We appreciate
Thank you
it.
very much.
Okay, I know how you guys are, so I'll go ahead and take it. Royce makes a move that we dismiss. Wait. Oh, tough luck.
There's one or two other things real quick. For those that don't know, the number that we were given is $84,588. New numbers will make sure we get you that information.
Thursday, we'll be spending some time talking to a lawyer because there's so many things that me and Joni have just literally become so overwhelmed with the legalities of everything. So we're going to talk to them to get some insight and some guidance and direction into what is actually important to get done and what isn't as far as everything goes. So as things come up, we're going to keep posting things to the Facebook page. That seems to be the best way to get the information out in mass. There's already a bunch of videos there from a lot of different sources. This will be up there now, today's meeting and each of the subsequent meetings. Tell the folks of the church to go there, get their grandkids to help them get on if they have to, because it's important that they look at this information that we're all doing, because this isn't everybody in our church, this isn't all of our voting members, and I want them to be as educated as possible without having to take a series of Sunday mornings to rehash everything that we're doing here, because Sunday is meant for the Word of God and the edification of the Spirit, not for minutia. You know, so we're going to keep true to what Sunday is, and I'm not going to, take Sunday mornings to do that with. So help us get that information out to everybody, to get to the Facebook pages, get the grandkids, the kids, whoever, to help them get on there so that they can look at all of the information that is being posted. When a new number comes up, we will most certainly share it with you, but first and foremost, this is still discernment. No decisions have been made. God's going to be in the midst of it one way or the other with this church. That's the one thing that we have all covenanted together, is that we will be in staunch and fervent prayer about this process to guide and lead the direction that we need to go. Like you said, when it comes to voting, it becomes a crapshoot at times, So we the best thing we can do is educate ourselves as much as humanly possible. Now, you can...
Yeah, part of the discernment is the art of the possible. That's the reason we got to talk to the lawyers and everybody, figure out what's possible and what's not. But that's part of it. So what we'll do, we'll have a motion by Royce and a second by Coach, and then we'll all vote to dismiss, and then we'll let Mike do a prayer on the way out. If not, you guys will be in the parking lot. Okay, so Royce, you make a motion? Coach, second it. All in favor, please stand if you're able.
And I'll pray. God, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for what Steve has brought to us and the wisdom that is in those words. God, we pray that that we would consider them in their full time and in their full course. And God, that as we continue through this process, that God, you would certainly be at the middle of this, that you would be leading this church into its purpose and its destiny in your kingdom, and that God, we would be the obedient disciples that you call us to be, and that we would take every step with you, and that we would bind ourselves to you in this process, God, and that through your leading and through your discernment and through your grace and love and mercy, we would truly become the church that you have called us to be. And we ask all that in your most precious and holy name. Amen.